We're here with one of the great columnists, Miranda Devine, at the New York Post. And Miranda Devine, you've written a very compelling and intriguing piece about the Bidens, Joe Biden, and Joe Biden's chief of staff, who appears to be this Svengali, the invisible hand behind much of this. Can you explain to the American people who this is?
Yeah, hi, Mark. It's a man called Anthony Bernal who has worked for Joe Biden since 2008 during the first Obama campaign when he was sort of advising her about her new role as second lady, and he's been very tight with her ever since, and in fact inveigled his way into this sort of inner sanctum.
Wait a minute. I love that word. I haven't heard that word like in 20 years. I love that. See, you're a great columnist. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, let's say wormed his way into the Biden family loyalty circle. He was the only, well, actually, there were two aides, but he was one of only two aides who, during the 2020 election campaign, when Joe Biden was hiding out in his basement, Anthony Bernal and another aide were basically living in Wilmington and were at the house every day. So they were inside during a period when, people like me, reporters like me from the outside could tell that Joe Biden was cognitively impaired. He was there inside making sure that that problem that Joe Biden had was kept secret. And from then on, that was his job, basically, for the next 4 years. And he was Jill Biden's sort of muse. He used to dress her. He organized the multiple Vogue covers that she had. He would travel with her overseas. And particularly in that last year when Joe Biden was really checking out, and Jill Biden, the First Lady, stepped up and started fancying herself as sort of the power behind the throne, and she would do personal solo campaigning. She'd fly around the country. She'd fly overseas using Air Force One, and she had Anthony Bernal as her sidekick the whole way. And he was trusted, so much so that he was really her de facto chief of staff. She didn't have a chief of staff, but that's what he was acting as. But he was also given the title of special assistant to the president because he was so ever present in the family life. Also with Hunter Biden, he was close to Hunter. It was Hunter and Anthony Bernal who met at the White House to discuss Hunter's strategy when he decided to become aggressive when James Comer was investigating him, and Hunter decided to take his lawyer and go and gate crash the oversight hearings, etc. It was Bernal who was giving him advice behind the scenes. So this is a Rasputin-like character, 52 years old, former child actor from Arizona. He's gay. He's very much ensconced with Jill Biden. I saw him in action a few times. For the most, I saw him in the Delaware courtroom where Hunter was being tried on gun felonies last year. And he was just glued to Jill Biden. He's a very diminutive character, so he's not very noticeable. But he was always there just watching her very attentively, making sure that she had everything she needed. And she loves that, having a little factotum following her around everywhere.
And you're surmising, and I think you're right, that he may have had some role in the way the White House was managed, that he would at least have information about who might be using that signature machine and things of that sort, right?
Yes, I don't think that the Bidens would have been able to do such a good job of hiding Joe Biden's infirmity if it had not been for this really Rasputin-like genius, which is Anthony Bernal. And you saw the other day David Hogg, who was the head of the DNC and then ousted, but he was sort of ambushed by Project Veritas in one of their undercover videos and asked about Bernal, and he said, yeah, he was immensely powerful. Everybody who worked for in the White House regarded Anthony Bernal with a lot of fear and loathing. And in fact, our very good White House correspondent, Stephen Nelson, did an amazing story last year in March, actually, before anyone else had a wind of what Bernal was up to. And he found that for the last 10 years, there had been complaints about him for sort of sexual harassment and just really off behaviour. He used to make jokes about the size of the genitalia of other staff members, and he was a bully. He would be sort of the loyalty police, demanding to know of other staffers, are you loyal to the Bidens? And he would make sure that the people who he perceived weren't were soon thrown out of the inner sanctum. So he was not liked, but because Jill Biden loved him, he was just untouchable. Things that would have got the average person thrown out of a normal company, he managed to survive. And it was ironic because, as a lot of these staff members say, Joe Biden would constantly say, oh, you know, decency is on the ballot. Jill would say that too. And Joe Biden wagged his finger at the staff and said, we expect a higher standard than what existed here under Donald Trump. And yet here was this man who really seemed to be a bully.
Mm-hmm. I assume Chairman Comer is going to want to get this guy's testimony under oath, no? Get him deposed at least?
Yes. In fact, James Comer, the chairman of the Oversight Committee, sent out 5 subpoenas, including to Anthony Bernal, basically to get in these former aides of Joe Biden in to testify about the use of the auto pen and whether they were usurping the president's authority. And apparently Bernal was the last to respond. They've all lawyered up. And just last week, apparently, Comer managed to get hold of his lawyer. And one of those 5 aides is Dr. Kevin O'Connor, the doctor who kept on telling us that Joe Biden is absolutely rinky-dink, you know, 100% fine. He's got a clean bill of health. And so he's set for testimony behind closed doors at the end of June.
We're here with Miranda Devine, great columnist for the New York Post. So this guy, Anthony Bernal, or whatever his name is, you know, Politico did a piece on him a few years ago that he's a really nasty piece of work. Let me ask you something. Were there many leaks about this guy or against this guy during the Biden presidency? I don't seem to remember that. Were they that scared of him?
No, you're absolutely right. There was really not much about him. He's managed to fly under the radar pretty well, which is, I think, a prerequisite for being the keeper of Biden's secrets. They're a very secretive family, a lot of secrets to keep, and that's why he managed to burrow his way into their inner sanctum. I think, Politico ran their piece after our Washington reporter, Stephen Nelson wrote. He really broke news there. He got a lot of people, a number of sources, probably about 5 or 6 sources, to actually speak, and it was like the dam was breaking. They really hoped that this message would get to Joe Biden, who I think these White House staffers still believed was an honorable person, and they couldn't believe that he would have someone like that on his staff. And apparently Jill Biden, people would go to Jill Biden and say, look, your guy, your top aide is behaving appallingly. And Jill would say, wipe her hands of it and say, go and talk to Anthony if you've got a problem. Don't talk to me. And, people who were her fans thought, oh, she probably doesn't know what he's doing in her name, in Jill Biden's name. But she did know. She knew exactly what he was doing, and she didn't care because she enjoyed his company, and she enjoyed the fact that he, I guess, helped her to become second lady and helped her to become first lady. She became reliant on him. And I think, this is just a guess, I think that he blew smoke in her ear and told her that she was much more intelligent and much more important than she really was, because, of course, that made him more important. And so, he would, for instance, there was a photograph very early on in Joe Biden's presidency, where she was seated at Joe Biden, the president's desk on Air Force One, with the sort of jacket hung over, the Air Force One jacket slung over the back, and the caption was "Studying up for the G8." So she had her glasses on and she had a big binder in front of her, as if she was someone important. Similarly, towards the end in his last year, she was there photographed chairing a cabinet meeting with, she had the CIA director, William Burns, next to her, looking decisively sort of embarrassed about this usurpation of the president's power. Just the wrong thing to do. And also her insistence that she be called Dr. Joe Biden when she had this sort of education doctorate, which was not really she's not a doctor really of anything. And, not to be mean, but I've read her dissertation and it's pretty...
it's barely literate.
Low rent, yeah. I mean, if you put it through ChatGPT, they say it's about a 10th grade level. So this is a woman not highly intelligent, but definitely ambitious and a social climber. When she first met and was dating Joe Biden in Delaware, there are stories told about how she showed up in Wilmington at a pizza joint dressed in a full-length mink coat. They still talk about that.
Now, why would she do that? Why would anybody do that?
Well, I don't know, she just thought of herself as being a cut above. And I think being a senator's wife, she thought was her calling. And then, of course, being the president's wife, she went into it whole hog and with a lot of ego involved. And look, I mean, I think Joe Biden absolutely deserves a wife like that, but it wasn't great for the country.
I think she had some issues apart from this guy. And the power-hungry thing, she liked the trappings of the White House. And, many have said it. I remember saying it several years ago on Fox even, that she's the invisible hand behind this thing. But if she were a loving wife, and I'll say it again because I believe that, or she would be taking care of her husband, not pushing him out front like that. And she would know that the country can't afford to have somebody like that at the helm. So she really is a Svengali herself, I think. Don't you?
I totally agree with you. I always think back to Nancy Reagan and how she was always at her husband's side and always protecting him and making sure that he was never put in a position where he was embarrassed. And she was fiercely loyal. Whereas with Jill Biden, how many times did you see Joe Biden wandering around looking completely lost and bereft and kind of like an idiot? And I always thought, where is his wife? Why is she not there protecting him from himself? And there was some footage of them on the tarmac getting off Marine One, and he couldn't find his way to put his arm into his jacket. And so she sort of in exasperated fashion turned around and was sort of helping him grudgingly. Look, it's human. I understand it's not an easy disease to be managing, but she was not, let me say, a soft, loving, concerned wife. I think she was more concerned about herself and her own image and her own ego and her own, swanning around the big donors in the Hamptons. She loved doing that. So she's, she is what she is. And I think Joe Biden chose his wife and he makes his bed and he lies in it. But she certainly was behind encouraging him to run for re-election, which was the unmaking of him. He probably could have gotten away with all the disasters that he wrought if he hadn't tried to run for re-election. And that really, because he's now done the Democratic Party wrong, they've turned their back on him and the wolves are out for his blood.
They did tremendous damage to the country, but as for them, in the end, they kind of have destroyed themselves, haven't they? Because that's what the legacy is going to be, that she was the invisible president, that he was cognitively incapable of being president, and that they did all these things, but she will be worse than Woodrow Wilson's wife, because Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, but Joe Biden really did have mental issues.
Absolutely. It is Shakespearean, and she's dubbed Lady Macbeth, and I guess Edith Wilson as well. But I don't know. I mean, I think I don't want to let Joe Biden off the hook completely because he was aware of what he was doing. He opened the border. He created the disasters.
No, you're right.
Delusional ambition led this country to this place. And she was part of his delusion. So was Hunter. So was the entire family. In a way, they were victims of Joe Biden, who really, I think, history will not look kindly on. I think he's really a vile person. And the damage that he's done to this country will not be undone for many, many years.
I agree with you. The way he treated people who were highly accomplished, smart people who came up for judgeships that he opposed, the way that he just smeared them and character assassinated them, and he was one of the first ones to start that kind of process against nominees. You know, you oppose them, but he tried to destroy them, he and Kennedy and some of the others. Yeah. I remember those years back then. But Joe Biden now, I mean, I read that they don't have any money, or they don't have enough money, and they're looking for ways to make money. Do you hear that too?
I'm not. I think Joe Biden has plenty of money, but I think Hunter may be a little broke. Just judging from the way his legal cases have gone, he had a very expensive lawyer in Abby Lowell. He's ditched him, and he's dumped a few of his lawsuits that he launched, which I think, in a lot of ways, were done to just chill free speech to get people off the trail. But now his lawyer is a guy, what's his name? He's an old mate of his father's anyway. He was the lawyer for them. Dick Harpootlian.
Easy
He's
for
an
you
old
to say.
Democrat. Yeah. From North Carolina. He was the defense lawyer for Alex Murdoch, who murdered his wife and son. And he owes Joe Biden a lot because Joe Biden actually endorsed him and did a video for him when he was running for office. So Dick Harpootlian obviously is doing a freebie for old time's sake for Joe Biden. So that's who Hunter's latest lawyer is. But Hunter seems to be very hungry for money, and he's gone off to South Africa, where he still remains his wife's homeland. And, of course, he was very upset about the fact that he lost his Donald Trump cut off his Secret Service entourage that he had there, driving him around, chauffeur-driven. So now he's driving in a rental car. But I think he does have financial problems because his sugar brother, who was the Hollywood lawyer Kevin Morris, decided to cut ties as soon as Joe was no longer in power. Hunter really is not of any use to anyone. So he's a lawyer. Maybe he'll go back to practicing the law, although he never really has.
I don't think so. Yeah.
No. And he's been disbarred in Washington.
Well, Miranda, thanks for everything. We really enjoy your column. You're really very, you gather the information, you pull it together, you make a lot of sense. You're an exquisite columnist. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to talk to you.
You too. Take care of yourself.